Warning: the stories in this video may be disturbing to some. Viewer discretion is advised. 911 operators. What call scares you till this day? I have one. I worked EMS while my friend was dispatched for this call. I was second, so I never got to interact with the person in question, but I listened to the 911 recording after. Got called to do backup for gunshot wound initially. Farm out about 20-30 minutes outside of town. Turned out to be a father who recently lost both his parents within the month. Didn't want his family to go through with such loss, either decided to kill his family to spare them that same fate. Father killed mom. 2 kids. We get a call from the daughter who's about 13. She's been shot in the head but is still alive and conscious. The call was about 30 minutes long, but the father was in the same room as her and the rest of the recently murdered family members. She was sitting on her bed with a bullet in her head, just saying in the most monotone voice, "I've been shot. My family is dead. My dad has a gun." Just in so much shock that she couldn't express an emotion. You could hear long pauses of silence as the dispatcher tried to get an idea of the situation and how the daughter and dad were just staring each other down for 5 minutes at a time with nothing but breathing to be heard and the daughter answering the dispatcher's questions. About 30 minutes go by of dispatcher going, "Are you alright? He's still there? He still have the gun?" etc, and just monotone responses. You can hear the sound of sirens in the background and the father leaves the room followed by a gunshot. The dad shot himself and died right as we were pulling up. She ended up living, but had lost every single member of her family that week. I don't know what happened after all that. That call is the reason I never wanted to pursue dispatch ever again. My friend was an absolute champion for how he handled it, but he never wanted to listen to it again. I have to. First, it was my second week, and I was plugged in with another dispatcher who was handling calls, and I was working the computer and stuff as part of my training. We got a call from a guy in a car, who said that he was in a near accident with another driver, and the other driver was following him and being aggressive. The dispatcher told him to turn around and look for a well-lit, busy place, like a gas station, to stop, and we would have someone on the way to meet him there. He was shot 5 times while on the phone with us, waiting for the officer to arrive. I found out the next day on the news that the guy flew in from out of town to walk his daughter down the aisle. Second, a month or so later, at the beginning of my shift, I received a call from a very distraught man whose dad had gone missing from his care facility. He had dementia and his dad thought he might be looking for a bar to get a drink. I took his information and got a description, and put out a be on the lookout for him. For these calls, we normally don't find out the outcome. In this case, one of my last calls that same night was a person calling who found a body on some train tracks, and it turned out to be the same guy I had put out the be on the lookout for. I had to call the deputy who went and took the guy's statement and tell him the news, and he then had to go tell the guy's son. That was a shitty end to the night. Former 911 operator here. Sometimes the calls that stick with you aren't the most physically traumatic. I once had a call from a 17-year-old kid who came home from a sleepover to find that his mother had moved, just packed up his sister and everything in the house and left while he was gone with no forwarding address or information. She also turned off his cell phone that morning, so literally the only number he could call was 911. He was trying so hard not to cry and his voice was shaking as he kept apologizing to me for calling 911. He just didn't know what else to do and had no other family. She also took everything, so all he had was a couple of things that he had taken to the friend's house. He told me his 18th birthday was in a couple of weeks and he literally had nothing. The officers that responded took him to a shelter. I think about him often and I hope he's okay. Even if he was a kid who got in trouble or had behavioral issues, I can't imagine coming home to find your mother has abandoned you. Family member worked as police dispatcher, received a call from an elderly woman. Her husband had just been killed in their garage by an intruder. She heard it happening. She's wheelchair bound but phone was next to her. She frantically begged my family member to help her. While he was on the phone with her, the criminal cut her throat. My family member stayed on the line 3 more minutes until cops got there. He could hear the sounds of the attack, her gasping and gurgling noises. He kept telling her help was coming and to hold on. Amazingly, She survived. Criminal was later caught. A 17-year-old who just wanted the thrill of killing someone and picked them at random. He's on death row now. I was a 911 operator. When I asked for the address, I got an angry man yelling, "Just get the ducking ambulance here." When I asked what happened, the caller said, "You don't need to ducking know that. I just need to know what happened so I know who to send and what equipment to bring. Sir, just send a goddamn ambulance. My kid's having a seizure. Don't send any ducking police." Don't send police coming from a caller is basically them telling on themselves. Please send police, because the patient or the EMS crew or both could be in danger. So I passed a note to my partner, who was dispatching. Send PD. Extremely uncooperative caller. I tried my best to get through the rest of the questions. How old is the kid? Are they conscious? Are they breathing? Has the seizing stopped? Etc. I got nothing but verbal abuse. All I knew is that a pediatric patient had a seizure when the call started. There was yelling in the background, and there was some terrible yelling in the foreground. Put your hands up. Hey, what the duck be? And that was it. Police had the caller. The patient ended up being a toddler who had been beaten to within an inch of their life by that asshole. That was terrifying and sad, and I hugged my own kid a little tighter that night. I'm going to do another one because this thread is a bummer and we all need a laugh. I assure you, not making any of this up. There was a ranch on the edge of the city limits in my area, right by a large park and swimming hole. That ranch had a variety of livestock, but they had an issue with their pygmy goats. Every few weeks we'd get a call because 100 little goats were roving through the park or down the street. One day, I took that call from a man in the park who had been chased by the goats into a porta potty. He was frantic, like, screaming, "You need to send animal control out here right now," and all the while, I could hear two other prominent, repeated sounds. The whack of little goat noggins rattling against the plastic porta potty, and bleating. Malevolent, incessant bleating. What did those goats want? What would they have done had he not found refuge? We'll never know. Nearly 30 years ago, my grandma was a widow living in a Florida retirement community. The landlords allowed a man in his early 40s live in the community despite strict rules regarding age minimums. He ended up going on a drug-induced rampage, stabbing his son and girlfriend. My grandma was getting her mail and he chased her all the way back to her doorstep and stabbed her over and over. She managed to crawl back into the house and call 911. We listened to the call during the trial, and it was absolutely one of the hardest things I've ever had to sit through. You could hear the man screaming outside the house. The 911 operator was very calm and trying to keep my grandma alive till help arrived. The guy took off in a stolen car and headed towards Georgia, going the wrong way on the highway. My grandma was airlifted to the nearest hospital and barely survived the attack. 370 stitches, including on both sides of her throat and all over her head. I firmly believe the calming, caring urgency from the dispatcher helped keep her going. Not scary, but I think about them often. Mother of 4 called in saying the trailer was on fire and her bedroom door was locked from the outside. I could hear her kids screaming and coughing in the background. I asked her if she could open a window, but they were nailed shut for some reason. Then we had her shove blankets under the door to stop the smoke from coming in before the fire department gets out there. After about 5 minutes the coughing dies down and she stops responding to me. Nothing at all. Then the fire department comes over the line saying the homeowner came out and that no one else was inside so we could slow the ambulance. We kept telling them we're on the phone with people inside but they assured us there was not. Eventually they pulled the people out. Mother and 2 of the kids died. The man who came out was letting this family stay with him and he torched it and left them in there. Second was a woman calling on her husband while they were fighting. She was screaming saying he was in the room and had a gun and wasn't sure if he was going to shoot her or himself. Seconds later I hear a gunshot and blood-curdling screaming. I asked who had been shot and she said he shot himself in the head. Impossible to get that 1 minute of chaos out of my head and it was months ago. I have to. 1. A call from a male who stated he'd found his girlfriend's son unresponsive. Very frantic caller. He and the mother passed the phone back and forth multiple times while I tried to give various rescue instructions. That part wasn't all that abnormal, but they later took the male into custody and I found out the initial caller had strangled the kid and then freaked out and called. Still makes me mad and it's been years. 2. Not mine, but a call they played for us in state training. An elderly man had a complete psychotic break and killed his wife with a hammer. Afterward he calmly called 911 and confessed. The dispatcher attempted to give rescue instructions, up until he realized the damage was extensive enough that her head was mostly gone. Several of the first officers on scene were violently ill because of how bloody the house was. 4. Leo had a dispatcher that needed some therapy after this one. Rural county sheriff's office is where we worked. Dead of winter. Roads were slick with a glaze of ice on top of the driven on hard packed snow. A rural mail carrier had lost control of her vehicle and rolled her Jeep Grand Cherokee on its top. Due to her delivering mail, her window was open and during the crash the vehicle had rolled on top of her arm. She was pinned but managed to call 911. While en route, we could hear the panic in our dispatcher voice when she said the vehicle had caught fire. On a summer day it would have taken us about 15 minutes running lights and sirens. Due to road conditions it took about 30. Every time my dispatcher keyed up on the mic to give us further information, I could hear the screams from the caller. By the time we got there she had expired. Our dispatcher listened and tried to talk to this woman while she was burning alive. She was absent for like a month while she got everything sorted out. I think of both of them often. Not scary, but will definitely stick with me for the rest of my life. Answered a 911 call about an unresponsive male driver passed out at a stop sign. I got the info and dispatched units to the scene. Realized moments later that the vehicle the caller described was my own. It was my 26-year-old son who had overdosed on heroin and Xanax. He was at a road literally 100 feet from dispatch and EMS. We made it there at the same time. Narcan saved his life. He currently in rehab for the next year and is rocking it. Man wrecked an 18-wheeler and was pinned between the seat and dash. Mel Gibson's wife in a science trial. He called me. I sent the trucks out. He knew he was gonna die. He asked me to pray with him. I am not religious, but I prayed with him. He got more and more quiet. I tried to keep him alert and talking. Passed out before crews got there. I heard the medics arrive on the phone. Dead on arrival. I can't remember the man's name, but I know he really loved his kids. My first medical call was a woman who found her young grandson had hung himself. I don't remember a lot of details, but I remember her cries still. I remember the quiet somber "I'm sorry" that someone told me right before he put the phone down and shot himself after trying for an hour to convince him to give himself up and step outside to talk to waiting police. I still remember a scream as a woman who called in to say she was throwing herself from her third-story window was yanked out of the window by a police officer that snuck in while I distracted her. I remember the quiet off insistence of a man as he kept getting my CPR instructions wrong while I tried to help him with his stepson who wasn't breathing. He was charged with homicide later and used the CPR as a cover for the child's injuries. I loved my job, but in some ways I'm glad I left it. Almost 10 years later some things still stick around. This was 10 plus years ago, but one night I had a call from a woman who jumped out of a moving vehicle to escape a sex assault. Suspect was an ex-boyfriend who had done it in the past. Luckily she was still able to run, but she was definitely injured and had no idea where she was, and this was when a cell phone's location was just the closest cell tower. She was, understandably, hysterical and I spent the first few minutes trying to get her calm and quiet enough to avoid detection. She found one of those big green electrical boxes to hide behind for a few minutes while the suspect drove back and forth looking for her. Once she couldn't see the headlights anymore, she was able to coherently speak to me and we determined she was in an office park. There were building numbers, but she wasn't near a street sign, so that wasn't very helpful. I told her to check the nearest mailbox and to read me the address on any mail that she could find. It took her a minute or two of running behind buildings to locate a mailbox, but when she did we were able to pinpoint her location. Half of the deputies in my county responded, and the happy ending to the story is that the suspect was still in the office park and when he tried to flee on foot, Chewie caught up to him and made the arrest. Oh, Chewy was a 120-pound German Shepherd who served a long and distinguished career at my agency. This wasn't a call that necessarily keeps me up at night, but it was the scariest in the moment call I ever took. I was a 911 operator. I get a call one night of a woman crying. Not abnormal. People don't tend to call 911 on good days. She's crying but trying to hold it together. Her son fell in the bathroom and isn't responding to her. She can crack open the door a little bit but can't open it because he has fallen against the door and the bathroom is small. She can see in a little bit. Her grown-up son is living with her. He went into the bathroom to do some drugs. I don't know what kind, but it was the kind you inject with a needle. We know this because she can see the needle hanging from his arm. I asked if this had ever happened before. She said yes. She gave me his age, mid-20s, and her address and some other things I needed. While I'm talking to her, I can hear in every word this woman speaks the tremendous love and fear of a mother for her child. Her son is dying, or is dead, and she knows it, but she can't do anything but stay as calm as possible to answer my questions. She was holding on, but I could hear it in her voice. He was in his 20s, but it was her baby dying on that floor and she couldn't do a thing about it. That was about 8 years ago. I still feel upset when I think about that call even now. Rescue got there and he did live, but that doesn't change how I remember feeling. That poor mother. Former 999 call taker here. One call that stayed with me was from a woman whose daughter was choking on pizza. She had the phone on speaker, which was needed because just after giving the address the caller just started screaming. The most hair-raising screaming I'd ever heard. Then she started screaming, "She's dead. She's dead. She's dead," over and over again. Her husband was following my instructions in the background. No idea how he could hear me over the screaming. The crew got there quickly, but the patient didn't make it. Just by typing this out I can hear her screaming again. Here we go. This is my darkest call for help. Before becoming an EMT, I was a team leader for a lifeline service. Emergency buttons for old people. In the UK these can be linked to smoke alarms. A call came through for a smoke alarm activation in a house roughly about 5 minutes away from our call center. All I could hear initially was the beeping of the smoke alarm. It was distorted because it was so loud. In the background I heard a faint but panicked call for help and what sounded like the service user desperately asking for water. I obviously called the fire service. I kept the call open and listened as a roaring sound gradually got louder and louder. I then could hear a cracking and popping sound. Probably the windows. I'm not fully sure what I heard then, but it sounded like the man faintly screaming and making gurgling sounds. After several minutes of listening to this and repeating instructions for him to get outside, I could hear respirators and the beeping of the fire service's radios. At this point I decided to leave the call center being run by my colleagues and drive to this house. I thought they must have rescued him, but I was in denial about what I actually heard. Once I arrived, the fire service told me that they still hadn't found anyone. About an hour later, I was informed that they had found a body. This man was a wheelchair user. He was found next to his wheelchair by the back door, locked inside the house. I had to go to coroner's court to explain my involvement. This is where I learned he was a smoker who regularly lit his cigarettes with matches. He also used a paraffin-based cream for his skin. It was believed he had lit a cigarette, dropped the match onto his knees and accidentally set fire to himself. He had to be identified using his dental records. The cries for help and the noises of gurgling and screaming still haunt me to this day. I'm not even sure if it was him gurgling or just something else making a similar sound, but I can't get the image of what it looked like out my head. This was about 3 years ago now. I will never let myself forget this man. He taught me that you should never get emotionally invested in an incident. I've seen and dealt with equally as nasty a situation as an EMT, but thanks to this gentleman, I can let go of the emotional baggage that comes with ambulance work. Sorry for the lack of structure in this comment. It was painful to write. My mom told me of one call that bothered her for the longest time. The son in a family of I think it was 6-7 other kids and a mom and dad calls in and is speaking so quietly, and in the background all my mom said she heard was crying and what sounded like fighting. This kid said he was 6 and he was calling because his dad was hitting his mom, but his brothers got in a fight with his dad because of it. My mom said she heard the kid scream and then the call ended. That little boy was able to tell her where he lived before the call ended, but by the time the police got there it wasn't pretty. The other kids were beat pretty bad. The mother was out cold but survived. But the little boy who put in the call was beaten within an inch of his life. His face was all broken, bloody, and he wasn't responsive. They had to shoot the dad and my mom never found out what started the whole fight. She told me that one hurt her the most because she felt if that boy wasn't talking to her he wouldn't have been hurt. She knew it wasn't her fault but she felt bad for the boy. When she died a few years ago, that family found where we were having her funeral procession, I think it's called, and they all wanted to say thank you one last time. My mom had a lot of crazy stories when she was a dispatcher, but that one hit her the most, and I know she would have cried tears of joy to see those kids alive and well. Former 911 operator dispatcher. I only did the job for a few months but there are two calls that stick with me. Call number 1, 911 terminal goes off and I answer. On the other end of the line there a woman screams, "He's raping me, please help." I ask her that she's just been raped, as most people tend to report crimes as if they are just happening when most times the crime has already occurred and finished. She screams, "No, he's raping now." This woman was actively being raped while on the phone. We get police dispatched and try to locate her but her phone is pinging in the middle of a cornfield and she's saying she's in an alley. Finally, after 10 minutes of listening to this woman being attacked, she gets away and gets to a house where we locate her. Her attacker got away. Call number 2, due to a batch of heroin that was heavily laced with fentanyl coming out of Ohio. Southern Indiana had one of the worst nights for overdoses. Narcan was scarce. For 8 hours we fielded an overdose call at least every 30 minutes. The one that broke me though came near the end of the shift. 11 terminal goes off and I answer. On the other end a 10-year-old boy states that his father is not breathing and turning blue. I ask if his dad was eating something or did he suddenly collapse, etc. Boy states his dad has a needle in his arm and he thinks his medicine is bad. I get the boy to unlock his door and the medical team and police arrive. Later the officer who arrived let me know the dad didn't make it. I cannot tell you how horrible it is to listen to a child as they watch their parent overdose and die. To those of you thin yellow line workers still working the phone lines, thank you for being the voice on the other end of the line. I've posted this before, so copied and pasted. I took a call from a female during this pandemic saying my husband won't let me see the children, so immediately I am thinking this is a custody dispute and not really a police issue, but my gut said there was something here, so I poked around a bit and asked some more questions. I asked her if she was allowed legally to see the children and how he was stopping her, and she simply told me he closes the curtains or locks the doors. How? Okay, so you live separately. When are you supposed to see them? No, we live together. Now honestly, I was very confused. He closes the curtains in your own house? How does that work? So I asked some more questions and it transpires that this woman was being forced to live in her garage by her husband. He locked her in there for most of the day. She had no hot water, only cold running water, and no toilet. She was peeing in the sink and shitting into plastic carrier bags and piling them in the corner. Her husband visited her once a day with a lovely family meal, but she only got this meal if she did what wives are supposed to do for their husbands, and when she refused he made her stand naked in the garden for 12 hours. It was probably 6 or 7 degrees Celsius at this time. She had no heating, but he lets me have the blanket off the bed, and this had been going on for 3 months. This poor woman genuinely didn't believe any of this was a problem, and she was simply calling me because she was upset that when she had misbehaved on purpose in order to be in the garden for 12 hours, naked, so she could see her children through the window, he had closed the curtains. It just absolutely floors me that in this modern world, and in the UK where we teach women they can be whatever they want and encourage equality, there are still women who think this is a normal life. I hope she is doing well now. Wow, you made it to the end. Please give us a like and subscribe. Chewy says so. Till next time, suckers.